It was not love at first sight. Actually, I had to be convinced to go out with him. We didn't seem to have anything in common. I thought, what would we talk about on a date? John and I, if you sort of did the stories of our lives, couldn't be more different. Because he grew up in small towns in Georgia and South Carolina and North Carolina, and I grew up in basically all over the world, although on military bases and military housing. But those kinds of experience were so different from John's, I thought I don't have anything in common with him. He majored in textiles, I majored in literature. But a friend of mine and John's saw what I couldn't see and said, no, you need to give it a try. We went out on a date, and honestly, I didn't get to talk to him because there was music playing the whole time. I couldn't hear a word he said. But at the end of the date, instead of trying to push me in any of the ways that were so common in the 1970s, he didn't press me at all. Instead, he kissed me on the forehead and said goodnight. And when he did, I thought, I need to think about this guy a little more. As there was a promise of sweetness in that gesture. I got a job in North Carolina, not too far from his hometown, for the summer, and John got a job in Washington, D.C., where my parents lived, to be close to me. And then we told each other our jobs, and we thought, well, rats, no. Now, I'm in North Carolina, and you're in D.C., and neither one of us, we're not close to one another. But, of course, living in Washington is very expensive, and his job didn't pay that much. So John lived with my parents for the summer. They got to know everything good and bad about him, and he got to know everything good and bad about my parents. And they really love one another, and it is a great blessing for me that they do. My dad had a stroke in 1990, and it was a left side stroke. He doesn't talk too much, and it's difficult for him to walk. Almost nothing cheers him up like talking to John on the phone or in person, because they built this special bond so many years ago. It is a marvel to me that our relationship is as fresh as it is. And what I've found really since the breast cancer, the election campaigns, and now this hurdle is that we're not having very many ebbs. It's mostly the high points that we're enjoying together. One misconception that people have about my condition and our decision is that they know what my condition is, and I honestly feel well. I've got lots of energy. I don't honestly feel any differently than I felt, not just last week, but before we found the cancer in 2004. But the misconceptions about our decision is that John somehow made me do this because he was ambitious. If my condition had necessitated his being with me, to take care of, to care for me in sort of a hospice way, a palliative way, he would have been there for me. But because it's not, he's not going to treat me that way, thank goodness. And that's what I want. One of the reasons we've been open about it is, first of all, we're not a particularly secretive family, but also we think it's perfectly legitimate for people to try to know as much as possible about the character, about the priorities of the people that they will elect. And I think that people learned something about John. They learned about the depth of his commitment to the paths we have chosen, public service, and also trying to make a difference in the lives of regular Americans who just deserve a champion. I've been blessed for the last 30 years to be married to the most optimistic person that I've ever met. But at the same time, he has an unbelievable toughness, particularly about other people, and that is his ability to fight for them. I do believe that it's unbelievably important that in our president we have someone who can stare the worst in the face and not blink. You're never going to outwork this guy. I mean, he works harder than any human being that I know, always has. You're not going to outsmart him. He is unbelievably smart. And when I was trying to decide whether or not this was the fellow for me, I realized it was those important and enduring things that mattered. If I had to pick a moment when sort of the beginning of loving this fellow, which I've done now for more than 30 years, started, I think it probably started with that kiss.
I'm John Edwards, and I approve this message.